Hello, fellow fiends. Welcome to another episode of Creepy Cases and Spooky Spaces. I'm your host, Cassiopeia. Please pardon the wet hair. I actually had a really busy week, so I'm actually recording this. It's like 1:45 in the morning before I actually have to have this up. So I get to record, edit, and upload all before 10 o'clock this today. So it should be fun, but I love it, and I am determined to bring you all of your episodes on time every week for the season. If you're listening from your favorite platform, don't forget you can now catch me on YouTube. And if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget you can take me along with you in the car while running errands or working out on your favorite podcast listening platform. Now, be sure to follow along on social media at creepycases.spookyspaces if you don't already for all news, updates, and content not shared on the podcast. So now that that's all out of the way, I have a doozy of a creepy case for you today. Now, this case, it's actually kind of still open, even though they have charged and convicted a suspect. It's that conviction is actually still being fought to this day. Some of the details are a little disturbing, so listener discretion is advised. This case has been on my radar for quite some time now, and it's very complex, and it's actually a little maddening. And as I get to the details, you'll see why. One reason I've been interested is because this actually happened not too far from where I live now, and I actually drive by the building, which is obviously something different than what it was at this time, but I actually drive by the building quite a bit. But let's get into it, shall we? So, Christmas Eve, 1975, Winter Garden, Florida. Yeah, we're going way back. A young woman, both of her parents, and another individual are murdered in a local furniture store. The owner of the store and the young woman's husband has also been shot and left for dead. Only he survives. He gathers the strength to get to the phone and calls his friend and chief of police. He's then rushed to the hospital. Now, as if the events of the evening haven't been horrifying enough for him, the nightmare is just beginning as he is named police's number one suspect. This week's creepy case is the Zeigler furniture store murders. So Tommy Zeigler was born in 1945. He was a well-loved and well-known in a well-off family. He graduated with honors. He entered the family business and in 1967 married the love of his life, Eunice. Now, people said they made marriage look easy, and they loved each other, and they were a team. They were definitely happy both in and out of the home, and Eunice actually took care of Tommy's father when he had a stroke. And their time together was what Tommy cherished most. They had a great lifestyle. They took walks together, rode bikes together, and he loved listening to her play the piano. Life was great for the couple until that fateful Christmas Eve in 1975. The W.T. Zeigler furniture store was pretty busy with last-minute deliveries. And around 9:18 p.m., Don Fick received a phone call from friend and store owner Tommy Zeigler. There had been a robbery, he had been shot, and he needed help. Now, just a few short minutes later, around 9:21, Tommy is helped out of the store. His shirt is covered in dry blood. At 9:23, he was checked into the hospital where it was found that he had a bullet in his abdomen that missed his liver by a mere centimeter. David Detective Donald Fry of the Orange County Police Office was assigned to the case, his very first major crime. Now, it was a gruesome scene. There were 4 victims. Well, there were 4 murdered victims, that is. You had Eunice Zeigler, her parents, Virginia and Perry Edwards, and Charlie Mays, a man who ran a team of migrant workers and was known as a credit customer to the furniture store. Now, all had been shot to death, while Perry and Charlie were also bludgeoned with a metal crank. Now, the store was peppered with bullet holes, over 30 shots having been fired, and the victims had been shot with more than one gun from more than one angle. It was a very complex scene with a lot of complicated evidence, and so police had a lot of work ahead of them. Now, there were pools of blood in various locations around the store, bloody footprints, multiple guns, and separate locations for each body. Spray patterns showed 2 lettings of blood, and May's fatal injury occurred at least 15 minutes after his first violent attack. A gun holster lay upon a pool of dried blood. Donald Fry came to the conclusion that this wasn't just a mere robbery, it was a calculated process. Now, after coming across a trail of blood leading from the phone Tommy had used to call Fick for help to the chair where he waited for said help to arrive, Fick also made the conclusion that Tommy must be considered a prime suspect. He believed that he shot himself in the abdomen after he called for help. Now, he came up with this theory, zeroing in on Tommy, which, as you know, irks the hell out of me. I actually can't stand when, police don't actually investigate the crime. They get one person in mind, and what they do is they fit the evidence around their theory that this person did it, instead of actually investigating the evidence and finding the person who actually did it. And this also, just so many have been wrongfully convicted, and it's proven that they've been wrongfully convicted, and their reputations are ruined, and other people go free, and sometimes those other people aren't even caught, because nobody even cares enough to actually investigate and figure out who actually committed the crime. And I also think it falls on the jury who convict on just circumstantial evidence, and that definitely needs to stop. Rant over. So Fry actually started out to prove this theory of his. However, he neglected to examine and cross-reference all of the available evidence, and experts say that the evidence wasn't handled properly and some of it wasn't even processed. Now, Fry's theory is that Tommy murdered Eunice for a $500,000 life insurance, and that her murder necessitated the 2 deaths of Perry and Virginia, which I'm not sure why, because honestly, I think that if he just kind of did away with Eunice privately and personally, there would have been even more reason to convict him. But Fry believed that Tommy killed Mays and attempted to kill 2 others, a man named Felton Thomas and a man named Edward Williams, who were helping with deliveries that evening. Now, bear with me, because the following sequences are only assumed. And keep in mind that Donald Fry actually altered times in the witness statements so that he could actually correlate and successfully combine the 2 accounts, which makes me wonder what else he had altered. Now, according to Felton Thomas, Tommy had arranged for Charlie Mays to pick up the used television from the store at 7:30 p.m. Now, Tommy had also asked Edward Williams to help him deliver some Christmas presents, and Williams testified that Tommy had arranged to meet him at 7:30 at Tommy's home, which, why would you have somebody supposed to meet you at one place and have somebody else supposed to meet you at another place? Now, Fry believed that Tommy killed Eunice somewhere between 7 o'clock and 7:24 p.m. Then he killed Perry in Virginia, and a bullet lodged into the store's clock stopped it at 7:24. Now at 7:30, Felton claims that he and Mays arrived at the store to pick up the television, and Felton named Tommy Zeigler as the man who approached them. And Tommy suggested that they all go for a drive together. The three drove to an orange grove where Tommy showed 3 guns to the other 2 men, suggesting that they should try them out by shooting into the ground. Now, Fry claimed that this was an odd request, but Felton and Charlie happily complied, and Fry believed that this was a ploy to get their fingerprints on the weapons. However, when those weapons were tested, all of them had been wiped clean. So I'm not quite sure why you would do this to get fingerprints if you were just going to wipe the fingerprints off. Now, Felton claimed that they returned to the store, and Tommy noticed that he didn't have his keys with him and attempted to break in. And Mays claims that he was just nervous and asked Tommy to go home and get his keys, and all 3 men went together. Now, meanwhile, Edward Williams claims he had been waiting for Tommy, who is now, according to his statement, around 20 minutes late. Now, he saw them arrive and saw Tommy go into his garage and get a box of ammunition. And now, according to Edward, Tommy asked him to wait a few more minutes. And I mean, I kind of wonder, like, I couldn't really find it anywhere, but I kind of wonder how he knew that Tommy had grabbed a box of ammunition. Like, I don't think you would have been that close, like close enough to see it, or like maybe he had it in his hands when he went back over to ask him to wait. But I still think it's just kind of weird that he knew specifically what Tommy went in to get. Now, Felton tells police that they returned to the store where Tommy coaxed Charlie inside, but Felton was nervous and left. And Fry thinks that this is when Tommy killed Charlie. Now, Fry assumed that Tommy went back to his home, where Edward then kind of takes on and carries on the story from this time frame. Now, he claims that Tommy wiped down the car and drove with Edward back to the store. And when they arrived, Tommy went in first, and Edward said that despite the store being dark, he could see the gun that Tommy was holding as he approached him. And Edward said that he was terrified, and Tommy pulled the trigger 3 times only to find that the gun was empty. Now, he claimed that Tommy handed him the gun to alleviate his fear, but Edward fled anyway, seeking refuge at a nearby restaurant. Now, according to Fry, this all happened around 8:50. Well, it was 8:50 when Edward attempted a failed call to the police using the restaurant phone. And then he fled to Orlando, and about a half an hour later is when Tommy called Dawn at the party asking for help. Now, Edward later turned the gun that he claimed Tommy had given him, and it was eventually identified as the murder weapon that killed Perry and Virginia Edwards. Now, to me, Fry's account is just way outlandish and just kind of, I mean, ridiculous in a way. Because if you think about it, all it would take is one little hiccup and the whole thing would have been done. And by done, I mean not successful. Someone would have seen, or someone would have gotten away, someone, like, just something. would have just completely unraveled the whole plan. But Tommy's count is much simpler and actually fits the evidence that has been presented. And ever since 1975, when he told his recollection of what happened that night to his defense attorney, Terry Hadley, just a few days after he recovered from the gunshot to his abdomen, his story has never changed, nor has it been altered as Donald Fry altered other statements. But also, Donald Fry has never looked into it, which, if you're a detective investigating a multiple homicide, don't you think you should actually investigate? Now, Tommy states that he and Eunice were gifting a new recliner to her parents for Christmas. And the three of them had gone to the store to pick one out while Tommy waited at home for Edward Williams to arrive and help with the last minute deliveries and Christmas presents. Now, Tommy had arranged to meet at 7 o'clock, but Edward was late. And they drove to the store in Edward's truck when he arrived. Now, Tommy entered the dark store ahead of Edward, trying to turn on the lights. And it was found later that a breaker had been shut off. It was then that he was assaulted from behind by two men. And the doctor's testimony actually corroborated a lump on the back of Tommy's head. And he also had lost his glasses and was unable to see well in the dark store. And Tommy's broken glasses were actually found inside the store. Now, he said that he fired one shot with his .22 caliber gun that he carried on him in self-defense, but the gun jammed, so he threw it at his assailants and grabbed a .357 Colt pistol that he kept in a drawer nearby. He was unclear on how many shots he fired before he was shot and knocked to the floor unconscious. Now, when he came to, his assailants had already left. He began crawling around the store, eventually found the phone, and called Don Fick at the party. Now, Tommy's lawyers actually had him evaluated by a psychiatrist in Tampa, Florida. It's actually my hometown, so yay, Tampa. Dr. Theodore Macklin conducted an interview and came to the conclusion that Tommy was telling the truth. In his subconscious state, he actually recalled hearing a voice say, "Mays has been hit. We will have to get rid of him." Now, Tommy's attorneys had a very difficult task of convincing a jury that Tommy did not commit the crimes, but was the victim of a robbery or maybe even something worse. Now, Tommy was actively involved in helping clean up corruption in Winter Garden, and he claimed to have just been a witness to a loan sharking ring that victimized migrant workers, and he had also just helped a bar owner retain his liquor license when he was being pressured to sell. There were allegations that the owner, Andrew James, had offered to sell drugs to an undercover agent for the Beverage Commission. Now, Tommy believed that this was all part of a ploy to revoke James's license, and he stood as a character witness for him. His testimony challenged the veracity of Baker, the undercover agent. Now, Baker had his own character witness, Judge Maurice Paul, who just 6 months later would preside over the murder trial of Tommy Zeigler. No, I'm sorry. Once again, let me break in here. Did no one find this to be rather convenient or, like, in general, just not a good idea? Like, clearly he's going to be biased and maybe want a bit of retaliation or, just definitely not somebody who should be presiding over the murder trial to begin with. Now, in 1987, it was discovered that some of the evidence was actually withheld from the defense, and other items were turned over too late to be processed in time for the trial, despite multiple requests from the defense. And this actually happens a lot as well. And I feel like there should be like a fee, or there should definitely be some kind of penalty for it, because why would you withhold evidence? Because obviously you're withholding it because maybe it'll prove somebody's innocence, or at least bring it to the fact that it's so questionable that even if they were guilty, it would definitely put a damper in your case. Now, bullets from the scene weren't labeled. A lift that was made from a bloody footprint was lost, and the FBI actually shredded partial prints taken from the store and the weapons. And all of this was evidence that could have cleared Tommy. Now, Charlie Mays, his van was found parked behind the furniture store just on the other side of a 6-foot fence, and it was never processed for evidence. Fulton Thomas claimed that he went with Charlie to get the TV that night, and he said that he and Charlie were alone in the van, except a witness, Barbara Skipper, said that she sold a large gas cylinder to Charlie Mays that night, and he had 2 other black males with him. A tooth that was found on Charlie Mays' parka was lost, yet forensic dental analysis testified that this tooth wasn't from anyone at the scene. An expended cartridge case was found, yet it didn't match any of the guns that were taken from the scene. The blood that was found on Mays' feet didn't match anyone at the scene. Interesting. And it was quite difficult to know who did what to who. Now, Edward Williams, his trousers weren't tested for gunpowder residue until 2 weeks before the trial. And when they were finally turned over, there was no residue on them, even though he claimed that he put a gun in his pocket when he ran. Now, Tommy also had no gun residue anywhere on him, although the prosecution claimed he fired 28 bullets. So please tell me how you can fire 28 bullets from multiple guns and not have any gun residue or bullet residue, gunpowder. You can't have any of that, or you don't have any of that on you at all? Question mark. Fulton Thomas told Donald Fry that he actually had never met Tommy until that night. And Tommy claims they hadn't met until the trial. And now the thing with that is police never really pressed for a description of the white male he claimed was Tommy that had approached them when they first got there. Now, 2 aspects that Felton description had got wrong was the clothes Tommy was wearing and what car he had been driving. Now, I'm sorry, but if you spent 20 minutes driving to a location with somebody, I think you would remember what they were wearing and what kind of car that they were in. Now, Tommy had no blood on him when he met up with Felton and Edward, yet they claimed that he had just murdered 3 people at this time. And Edward Williams turned over his evidence, but it wasn't the clothes that he was wearing either. So he also claimed that he ran to a restaurant to hide around 8:45-ish, but it wasn't until after Tommy was taken to the hospital that witnesses say they saw a black male come in to use the phone, which would have been closer to that 9:25-ish mark. Now, so with this timeline, Tommy would have had to attempted to shoot Edward, move his truck, wipe it clean of all fingerprints, bend a prong on the gate, go back into the store, wipe all of the weapons clean of fingerprints, call for help, shoot himself, wait for police, be examined, be carried to the car, and driven to the hospital. Oh, and I'm sorry, but if I'm going to shoot myself in a superficial way to make it look like I've just been robbed to cover up a murder, I'm not going to do it in the abdomen and almost miss my liver, yeah, by a centimeter. Come on. So, even with all of the shenanigans, the judge's obvious support of the prosecution, which was witnessed by multiple people on both sides, the prosecution and the defense. The jurors' first vote was 6 to convict and 6 to acquit. And eventually, the rest were swayed, or as I'd like to say, bullied, except for Irma Brickle. Now, she held out, but even after she was pressured and bullied by the other jurors, and she even passed out twice from the pressure. Now, she sent notes to the judge about what was going on in the jury deliberation room, but he refused to see her in fear of a mistrial. But he had her doctor come visit her, and the doctor just ended up prescribing Valium. So helpful. Now, of course, after taking the Valium, she could no longer hold out. So she voted guilty, but even though she did, she has stood by her belief that Tommy is innocent. In 1976, Ken and Linda Roach called OCSO, Orange County Sheriff's Office, to tell what they had seen and heard that night. They were told that their information wasn't needed. Of course, because why? In 1979, they actually contacted the defense and told them that while driving past the store that night, they heard sounds like exploding fireworks. And they saw a black male and 4 cars out in front of the store, which contradicts the original story of there only being 2 cars. Now, in 1987, a 15-page report was submitted, which stated that Tommy's shirt had dry blood on it. Only, didn't they claim Tommy had just shot himself a few minutes before calling for help? So, wouldn't the blood still be wet? Also, where did this report go? Now, in a taped interview with a young man whose family was actually staying at the Winter Garden Inn, which was right behind the furniture store, they observed a police car with an officer who had his gun drawn as he laid on the hood before they heard shots in the store. Now, he was told this information wasn't helpful, but the family was offered a free trip to Florida if they decided that they heard the shots before they saw the officer on the scene. In 1982, Ed Rowe was told by Charlie Mays' son, Ernie, although Ernie denies ever telling him this, but his father had left the house that night with a pistol in his coat and told the family that there would be money for Christmas. And he said that his father was not supposed to die that night. Tommy Zeigler was. And honestly, in a way, he kind of did. Now, in 1976, Tommy Zeigler was found guilty and convicted by the jury. Now, the jury actually wanted life in prison, but the judge went against their wishes and sentenced Tommy to the death penalty by electric chair. Which, why? Like, why don't you just give him life in prison? Why would you automatically sentence him to death? Now, Tommy is now 77 years old, and after 47 years, he is still in prison, but he is still fighting to prove his innocence. He's been denied 6 times for DNA testing that could actually prove that he's innocent. And I don't understand, because it kind of makes me wonder why you deny him so many times if you think that it's going to prove that he's guilty. Like, I feel like not somebody, because I'm sure a lot of these people aren't really around anymore. But they claim that Mays actually had Perry's blood on him and that Tommy had nobody else's blood on him. But the good thing is, on December 19th, Tommy's lawyers were granted permission for that DNA testing. And they're hopeful to get it done soon because they want to prove his innocence, and he's not in the greatest of health. I mean, he's 77 years old and he's been in prison for more than half his life. But if they do prove his innocence, this will go down as one of the biggest miscarriages of justice of all time. And I think a lot of that has to do with why they keep denying his testing, because if it turns out that he is innocent, there's going to be a lot of questions and a lot of heat, I'm sure. Now, can you imagine what Tommy has gone through or still goes through on a daily basis? He lost the love of his life. He lost his in-laws, and he actually liked them. Like, they actually got along. They actually were a family. He lost his reputation, his business, just basically his life. As, like I said, he has spent over half of his life in prison. So I really, really hope that he gets the justice he deserves if it is found that he didn't do it. And on that note, as I like to say, until next crime. Creepy Cases and Spooky Spaces with Cassiopeia is a Pizza and Pigtails production. All episodes are researched, written, and edited by yours truly. You can find new episodes every Friday, with bonus episodes coming out every other Tuesday. You can find the podcast on your favorite listening platform, or now you can find it on YouTube as well. Don't forget to follow along on social media, creepycases.spookyspaces, for all future news, updates, and maybe some content that you won't find on the podcast. Also, be sure to subscribe so you can get access to bonus content, early access to content, and a couple of little thank you swag. If you'd like to contact me about appearing on a future episode, maybe you would like to suggest your own creepy case or spooky space, or maybe you'd also like to reach out about ad space, you can reach me directly at creepycases.spookyspaces@gmail.com, or feel free to reach out through those social media platforms as well. And as always, see you next crime.